Margaret Evans stood outside the tall iron gates of the Grandview Country Club. Her hands felt cold as she held the white invitation card. She had read it so many times that the corners were now soft and bent. The card invited her to a charity gala hosted by Vivian Ashford, her old college roommate. They had shared a dorm room 20 years ago, but their lives had gone in very different directions since then. Margaret looked down at her dress. It was a simple floral pattern in soft blue and white. She had bought it from a discount store 3 years ago. The fabric was thin now, and there was a small stitch near the hem where she had repaired a tear. Her black shoes were comfortable but old. They had lost their shine long ago. In her hand she carried a brown leather bag. The leather was cracked in places and the zipper sometimes stuck. But it was sturdy and had been with her for many years. She took a deep breath and walked through the gates. The driveway was long and lined with perfect rose bushes. Each flower looked like it had been placed there by an artist. The country club building rose before her like a palace. White columns held up a grand entrance. Bright lights made the whole place glow against the evening sky. As Margaret climbed the marble steps, she could hear music and laughter from inside. A young man in a black suit opened the heavy wooden door for her. He looked at her dress for a moment, then smiled politely. Margaret thanked him quietly and stepped inside. The entrance hall took her breath away. The floor was made of cream-colored marble that reflected the light from 3 giant crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. A wide staircase covered in red carpet curved up to the second floor. Everywhere she looked, there were flowers in tall vases, paintings in gold frames, and mirrors that made the space look even bigger. But what really caught Margaret's attention were the people. Women glided across the marble floor in long gowns that sparkled with jewels. Some dresses looked like they cost more than Margaret's car. The men wore expensive suits and watches that caught the light. Everyone seemed to know each other. They laughed and kissed cheeks and talked in voices that sounded confident and loud. Margaret felt very small suddenly. She held her old leather bag closer to her body. A few people turned to look at her. Their eyes moved from her face to her dress to her shoes. She saw a woman whisper something to the man next to her. They both looked at Margaret, and the man smiled in a way that was not kind. Margaret thought about leaving. She could walk back through those iron gates and go home to her small apartment. She could make a cup of tea and sit in her comfortable chair and forget this whole evening. But something made her stay. She had received the invitation for a reason. She was here for a purpose. More people were staring now. Margaret could feel their eyes on her like tiny pinpricks. She stood near a tall column trying to stay out of the way. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne in tall, thin glasses. He did not offer her one. Another waiter carried small plates with food that looked too pretty to eat. He walked right past her without stopping. Then Margaret heard a voice she remembered from long ago. It was high and musical, but with something sharp underneath. Vivian Ashford was coming down the grand staircase. Vivian looked like a queen. Her dress was made of gold fabric that seemed to move like liquid water. Diamonds sparkled at her throat and on her wrists. Her dark hair was swept up in a perfect style. Her skin glowed as if she had just come from an expensive spa. She was talking to 2 other women who were following her down the stairs. They were all laughing about something. Then Vivian saw Margaret. For just a second, something flashed across her face. Was it surprise? Recognition? Something else? But the expression was gone so quickly that Margaret thought she might have imagined it. Vivian's face became smooth and blank. She whispered something to the women with her. They all looked at Margaret. One of them covered her mouth with her hand, but Margaret could see she was smiling. Vivian walked across the marble floor toward Margaret. Her golden dress caught the light from the chandeliers with every step. People moved out of her way automatically. When she reached Margaret, she stopped and looked her up and down slowly. Margaret felt like she was being inspected. "Margaret Evans," Vivian said. Her voice was loud enough that people nearby could hear. "What a surprise to see you here. I almost didn't recognize you." Margaret forced herself to smile. "Hello, Vivian. Thank you for the invitation." Of course," Vivian said, waving her hand in the air. Her diamond bracelet caught the light. "I try to invite everyone from our old college days, even if we've all gone such different ways in life." Margaret noticed how Vivian said the word different. She made it sound like some ways were better than others. More guests were gathering around them now. They sensed something interesting was about to happen. Margaret could feel their eyes on her worn dress and old bag. She heard someone whisper. Someone else laughed quietly. Vivian's smile grew wider. You look so comfortable, Margaret. That's such a sweet little dress. Is it vintage? Margaret knew that Vivian knew the dress was not vintage. It was just old. It's practical, Margaret said simply. Practical, Vivian repeated as if she was tasting the word. Yes, I suppose that's important for some people. She turned to the crowd that had gathered. Margaret and I used to share a room in college. She was always so sensible. While the rest of us worried about parties and dates, Margaret worried about her grades and saving money. The way Vivian said it made it sound like an insult. A few people in the crowd smiled. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Margaret felt her face getting warm. She held her bag tighter. Inside it, she could feel the weight of the folder she had brought. She thought about what was inside that folder. She thought about why she was really here tonight. Well, Vivian continued, I'm so glad you could come to our little charity event. We're raising money for underprivileged children tonight. Every dollar counts. She paused and looked at Margaret's dress again, though I don't expect everyone to contribute the same amount. We all give what we can, don't we? Margaret said nothing. She just watched Vivian and waited. The marble floor felt cold under her old black shoes. The chandeliers above seemed too bright. The music from the ballroom seemed too loud. But Margaret stayed exactly where she was. She had come here for a reason. And soon, everyone in this room would understand what that reason was. Vivian was not finished. She moved closer to Margaret, and the crowd around them grew larger. More people came from the ballroom to see what was happening. They formed a circle around the two women. Margaret could smell expensive perfumes mixing together in the air. She could hear the rustle of silk and satin dresses. You know, Vivian said, speaking to the crowd but looking at Margaret, some people just have a natural sense of style. They know how to dress for important occasions. She touched her own golden dress with one hand. And some people are more practical. A woman in a red dress laughed. She was wearing so many diamonds that she sparkled when she moved. A man in a dark suit nodded and smiled. He whispered something to the woman next to him. Margaret stood very still. Her heart was beating fast, but her face stayed calm. She had learned long ago not to show her feelings when people were cruel. She had learned to wait and watch and stay quiet. Vivian walked around Margaret in a slow circle like she was examining something in a store. That bag is interesting, she said, pointing at Margaret's old leather bag. Is it an antique? It's just a bag, Margaret said quietly. Just a bag, Vivian repeated. She laughed, and several people in the crowd laughed with her. Well, yes, I suppose it is just a bag. She turned to a woman standing nearby. Patricia, don't you have a bag just like that? I think your maid carries one. Patricia was a tall woman with white hair piled high on her head. She looked at Margaret's bag and wrinkled her nose. Oh no, Vivian. My housekeeper's bag is much nicer than that one. More laughter. Margaret felt it wash over her like cold water. She saw some people in the crowd looking uncomfortable now. An older man near the back frowned. A young woman in a blue dress looked down at her feet, but no one said anything to stop Vivian. Margaret, Vivian said, putting her hand on Margaret's shoulder like they were old friends, but her fingers pressed down hard. I'm worried about you. This is a very important event. There are photographers here. Important people. People who matter in this city. She paused and smiled. I would hate for you to feel out of place. I'm fine, Margaret said. Her voice was steady even though her hands wanted to shake. Are you sure? Vivian's voice was full of fake concern. Because I have an idea. My staff are all wearing lovely black uniforms tonight. Very elegant and simple. I could have someone find you one. Then you would feel more comfortable. You could even help serve the champagne if you wanted. That way you would feel useful instead of just standing here. The crowd went very quiet. Even the people who had been laughing stopped. Everyone understood what Vivian was really saying. She was saying that Margaret looked like a servant. She was saying that Margaret did not belong here as a guest. Margaret felt heat rise to her face. This was the worst insult yet. Vivian was trying to humiliate her completely in front of all these people. She was trying to make Margaret feel so ashamed that she would run away and never come back. A man in the crowd cleared his throat. A woman looked away. But still, no one spoke up for Margaret. No one told Vivian to stop. They all just watched and waited to see what would happen next. Vivian smiled at Margaret. It was a smile that said she had won. What do you think, Margaret? Should I call my staff manager? I'm sure we could find something in your size. Margaret looked at Vivian for a long moment. She saw the triumph in her old roommate's eyes. She saw how much Vivian was enjoying this moment. She saw the crowd watching, waiting for her to cry or run away or do something that would entertain them. But Margaret did not cry. She did not run away. Instead, she took a small step forward. Vivian, she said, and her voice was calm and clear. Before you call anyone, I wonder if I could have a moment. Just a moment to speak to everyone here. Vivian's smile flickered. She had not expected this. Speak? What could you possibly have to say? It won't take long, Margaret said. Just a few minutes. Since you invited all these people here for charity, I think they would be interested in what I have to share. Vivian laughed again, but this time it sounded different, less certain. This should be entertaining, she said. She turned to the crowd. Everyone, my old college friend Margaret wants to address us. Let's give her our attention, shall we? She said it like it was a joke, like Margaret was about to make a fool of herself. The crowd murmured and whispered. Some people smiled, expecting to be amused. Others looked curious. Margaret reached for her old leather bag, the one Vivian had mocked, the one with cracked leather and a sticky zipper. She held it in both hands for a moment. This bag had been with her through so much. It had carried her books when she was studying late at night. It had held her lunch when she could not afford to buy food. It had been with her through hard times and good times, and now it held something very important. Margaret found the zipper and began to pull it open. The sound seemed very loud in the quiet hall. Everyone was watching now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. The music from the ballroom seemed far away. Vivian watched with an expression that was still confident, but with a tiny bit of worry underneath. She glanced at the crowd, making sure they were all still on her side. This is so dramatic, she said, trying to laugh. What do you have in there, Margaret? Coupon? Some people in the crowd laughed, but the laughter sounded nervous now. Something in the air had changed. They could all feel it, even if they did not understand it yet. Margaret opened her bag completely. Inside was a thick folder. It was not fancy. It was just a plain manila folder, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. But the way Margaret held it made it seem important. She lifted it out of her bag carefully, like it was something precious. What I have here, Margaret said, speaking clearly so everyone could hear, is something I think you all need to see. Vivian's smile was completely gone now. Margaret, this is ridiculous. This is a private event. You can't just, I have every right to be here, Margaret interrupted. Her voice was not loud, but it was firm. You invited me. You asked me to come. And now I'm going to tell you why I really came. The crowd pressed closer. The diamonds and jewels and expensive watches caught the light from the chandeliers. But no one was thinking about fashion anymore. They were all focused on Margaret and the folder in her hands. Margaret opened the folder. Inside were papers. Lots of papers. They had numbers and dates and official-looking stamps. She held them up so people could see, even if they could not read them from where they stood. I came here tonight, Margaret said, because I work for the Henderson Foundation. It's one of the largest charitable organizations in this state. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Several people in the crowd nodded. One man said, of course. The Henderson Foundation is very respected. Vivian's face had gone pale under her makeup. What are you talking about? She said. Her voice was not loud and musical anymore. It sounded thin and worried. Margaret looked at her old roommate. For the past 6 months, she said, the Henderson Foundation has been conducting a special investigation. We've been looking at different charity organizations to see how they use their money. We wanted to know which charities really help people, and which ones are just using charity as an excuse for something else. The crowd was completely silent now. No one moved. No one whispered. They all stared at Margaret with wide eyes. And Vivian, Margaret said softly, we've been investigating your charity very carefully. Vivian opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked around at the crowd, searching for support. But everyone was looking at Margaret now. The woman in the simple floral dress. The woman with the old leather bag. The woman they had all been laughing at just minutes ago. Margaret held up the folder higher. Would you like to know what we found? Margaret did not wait for Vivian to answer. She knew that if she stopped now, Vivian would try to take control again. She had to keep going. She had to tell everyone the truth while they were listening. The Henderson Foundation, Margaret continued, was created 30 years ago by Thomas Henderson. He made his fortune in manufacturing, but he never forgot that he grew up poor. Before he died, he set up the foundation to help people who needed it most. Children without food, families without homes, communities without hope. The crowd was listening carefully now. Margaret saw the older man at the back nodding. The young woman in the blue dress was watching with wide eyes. Even the waiters had stopped moving to hear what she was saying. Mr. Henderson believed that charity should be pure, Margaret said. He believed that when people donate money to help others, that money should actually reach those who need it. Not just some of it. Not half of it. Almost all of it. She paused and looked around at all the expensive clothes and jewelry. Of course, running a charity costs money. You need offices and staff and supplies. The Henderson Foundation understands that. We know that some money has to pay for those things. But there should be a limit. A charity should spend most of its money on the people it claims to help. This is absurd, Vivian said suddenly. Her voice was shaky but trying to sound strong. You can't just come to my event and make accusations. I have lawyers. I have friends who— Let her speak, a man's voice called out from the crowd. Margaret looked and saw it was the older man who had been frowning earlier. He was wearing an expensive suit and had silver hair. I want to hear what she has to say, other voices agreed. Yes, let her speak. We should hear this. Be quiet, Vivian. Vivian looked shocked. These were her guests, her friends, people who had laughed at Margaret just minutes ago. Now they were telling her to be quiet so they could listen to the woman in the old dress. Margaret gave the older man a small nod of thanks. Then she pulled out a piece of paper from her folder. The Henderson Foundation has been watching Vivian's charity, which is called Children's Hope Alliance, for 6 months. We sent investigators to events. We looked at public records. We talked to people in the communities that were supposed to be helped, and we found something very troubling. She held up the paper so everyone could see the numbers printed on it. Last year, the Children's Hope Alliance raised over $2 million. That's a lot of money. Money that came from good people who wanted to help children in need. People in the crowd nodded. Some of them had probably donated to Vivian's charity themselves. But here's what we discovered, Margaret said. Her voice was sad now. Out of that $2 million, less than $300,000 actually went to help children. The crowd gasped. Someone said, that can't be right. Someone else said, where did the rest go? Vivian's face was red now. Those numbers are wrong. You don't understand how charity work functions. There are expenses. I'm getting to that, Margaret said calmly. She pulled out another paper. Yes, there are expenses. Let me tell you what those expenses were. She began to read from the paper. Her voice was clear and steady. $500,000 for administrative costs. That's a quarter of all the money raised. $300,000 for event planning and hosting. $200,000 for consultant fees. $150,000 for travel and accommodations. $100,000 for marketing and promotion. Margaret looked up from the paper. Should I continue? Because there's more, much more. The crowd was no longer just interested. They looked angry now. The woman in the red dress who had laughed earlier was frowning. The man who had smiled was shaking his head. Even Patricia, who had insulted Margaret's bag, looked upset. Those are necessary costs, Vivian said desperately. You can't run a charity without spending money. We need nice events to attract donors. We need consultants who know what they're doing. You need 3 different trips to Paris in 1 year, Margaret asked. She pulled out another paper. According to your charity's credit card records, which are public information for registered charities, the Children's Hope Alliance paid for 3 trips to France. The receipts show stays at luxury hotels, meals at expensive restaurants, and shopping at designer stores. Vivian opened her mouth and closed it again. She looked like a fish gulping for air. And consultants, Margaret continued. Let me tell you about these consultants. One of them is your sister. She was paid $75,000 for strategic planning. Another is your college friend Amanda, who received $50,000 for donor relations. And the third is your husband's business partner, who got $60,000 for financial advice. The older man in the silver suit spoke up again. Were any of these people qualified to do these jobs? Margaret shook her head. Your sister works as a yoga instructor. Amanda sells cosmetics, and your husband's partner is a real estate agent. None of them have any experience in charity work or nonprofit management. The crowd erupted in angry whispers. People were talking over each other. I donated $10,000 to her charity. I convinced my company to give $50,000. This is fraud. Vivian was backing away now. She held up her hands like she was trying to stop what was happening. You don't understand. This is all a misunderstanding. Margaret is trying to ruin me. She's always been jealous of my success. Margaret felt sorry for Vivian in that moment. She could see the panic in her old roommate's eyes. But she could not stop now. Too many people had been hurt by what Vivian had done. I'm not finished, Margaret said. The crowd quieted down to hear her. The Henderson Foundation sent investigators to the communities that Children's Hope Alliance claimed to help. We went to schools that were supposed to receive new computers. We visited food banks that were supposed to get supplies. We talked to families who were promised assistance. She paused and looked directly at Vivian. Do you know what we found? Vivian did not answer. She just stared at Margaret with wide, frightened eyes. Nothing, Margaret said. We found nothing. The schools never received computers. The food banks never got supplies. The families never received help. Some of them had never even heard of Children's Hope Alliance. They didn't know that a charity was supposedly helping them. They didn't know that wealthy people were donating money in their names. A woman in the crowd started crying. I gave money because Vivian said it would buy school supplies for poor children. I thought I was helping. You meant to help, Margaret said gently. Many people meant to help. That's what makes this so wrong. People gave money because they have good hearts. They wanted to make life better for children who are struggling. But their money was used for expensive parties and trips and salaries for people who did no real work. She pulled out a photograph from her folder. It showed a small school building with broken windows and peeling paint. This is Jefferson Elementary School. It's in the poorest neighborhood in our city. Vivian's charity claimed to have renovated this school last year. They showed donors beautiful pictures of what the school would look like. They raised money specifically for this project. Margaret held up another photograph. It showed the same school building, looking exactly the same. Broken windows, peeling paint, a playground with rusty equipment. This photo was taken yesterday. As you can see, nothing has changed. The children at Jefferson Elementary are still in a building that is falling apart. Still using textbooks from 20 years ago. Still going without proper supplies. The crowd was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was heavy and sad and angry all at once. A man in a dark suit stepped forward. Margaret recognized him from the photos in her folder. He was Robert Ashford, Vivian's husband. He looked at his wife with an expression of shock and confusion. Vivian, he said quietly, is this true? Did you really do these things? Vivian turned to her husband. Tears were running down her face now, ruining her perfect makeup. Robert, please, let me explain. It's not as simple as she's making it sound. Running a charity is complicated. There are so many costs that people don't understand. Did you take trips to Paris on the charity's credit card? Robert asked. His voice was cold. Vivian did not answer. Did you pay your sister and your friends with charity money? Still no answer. Did you lie about helping that school? Vivian began to cry harder. But she did not deny anything. Robert turned away from her. He looked at Margaret. What happens now? He asked. Margaret closed her folder. The Henderson Foundation has already contacted the authorities. There will be an investigation. People who donated money will be notified, and Children's Hope Alliance will be shut down. She looked at all the people in their expensive clothes standing in the beautiful country club. The foundation wants you to know something important. Real charity work is being done in this city. There are organizations that truly help people. Organizations where your donations make a real difference. We have a list of these charities if anyone would like it. Several people nodded and said yes, they would like that list very much. Margaret reached into her folder again. She had more to show them, much more. The crowd moved even closer, their anger growing with each new piece of evidence she revealed. I want to show you exactly where your money went, Margaret said. She pulled out a thick stack of papers. These are credit card statements from the Children's Hope Alliance. The Henderson Foundation obtained them legally through public records requests. Registered charities must make their financial information available to the public. She held up the first statement. In January of last year, The charity spent $12,000 at a luxury spa resort. The receipt shows charges for massages, facials, and a private suite for 3 days. Vivian tried to speak. That was a retreat. A planning retreat for the board members. We needed to— Your board has 3 members, Margaret interrupted. You, your husband, and your sister. And according to the spa's records, only one person used the suite. You, the crowd murmured angrily. The woman in the red dress shook her head in disgust. A man near the front said something harsh under his breath. Margaret continued. In March, there was a charge for $18,000 at a jewelry store. The receipt says it was for a donor appreciation gift. It was. Vivian said desperately. I bought a necklace for our biggest donor. Interesting, Margaret said. Because the jeweler's records show that the necklace was delivered to your home address. Not to any donor. She looked at Vivian's neck. In fact, isn't that the same necklace you're wearing right now? Vivian's hand flew to her throat, touching the diamond necklace. Her face went from red to white. She could not speak. Margaret went on, pulling out receipt after receipt. In May, the charity paid for a new car. The paperwork says it was for transportation to visit charity sites. But the car, a luxury sedan, is registered in your name, Vivian. Not the charity's name. In June, there was a charge for $25,000 for office furniture. But the Children's Hope Alliance doesn't have an office. It operates from your home. In August, $15,000 for team-building activities. The receipt is from a cruise company. A 10-day Caribbean cruise for 2 people. Each new revelation made the crowd angrier. People who had smiled at Vivian and called her a friend were now looking at her with disgust. People who had donated thousands of dollars were realizing that their money had paid for Vivian's vacations and jewelry and cars. Robert Ashford was standing very still, his face like stone. Margaret could see that he was hearing many of these things for the first time. He had probably trusted his wife. He had probably believed that she was doing good work. Now he was learning the truth along with everyone else. There's something else, Margaret said. Her voice was sadder now. Something that I think is even worse than the money. The crowd waited, wondering what could be worse than what they had already heard. Margaret pulled out a glossy brochure from her folder. It showed happy children smiling at the camera. They were in a bright classroom with new desks and books. The title read, Children's Hope Alliance Changing Lives One Child at a Time. This brochure was given to donors, Margaret explained. It shows all the wonderful things the charity was supposedly doing. New classrooms, food programs, after-school activities. She opened the brochure to show more pictures. These photos were used to convince people to donate. Look how happy these children are. Look at their new school supplies. Look at the hope in their eyes. She held up another set of photographs. These are the same children, but these photos were taken by our investigators last month. The pictures showed a very different scene. The children were in a run-down classroom with old broken desks. They looked tired and sad. There were no new books, no school supplies, nothing like what the brochure had shown. The photos in the brochure were fake, Margaret said. They were taken at a private school in another state. Vivian paid the school $1,000 to take pictures during a visit. She never helped those children. She never even met them. She just used their images to make donors feel good about giving money. A woman in the crowd gasped. Those poor children. They probably don't even know their pictures were used like that. Margaret nodded. They don't. And the real children who needed help, the ones who were supposed to benefit from this charity, never got anything. She pulled out more documents. Here are the grant applications that Vivian submitted to various organizations. She applied for matching funds, which means when donors gave money, these organizations would match it with their own money. She received over $400,000 in matching funds last year. But here's the problem, Margaret continued. To get matching funds, you have to prove that you're using the money for real charity work. You have to show receipts and reports and evidence that you're helping people. Vivian submitted false reports. She showed fake receipts. She lied to these organizations so they would give her more money. The older man with silver hair spoke up again. His voice was shaking with anger. I run one of those organizations, the Franklin Foundation. We gave her matching funds based on her reports. She showed us pictures of the school renovation. She gave us testimonials from families she claimed to help. Are you telling me all of that was fake? Margaret looked at him with sympathy. I'm sorry, Mr. Franklin. Yes, it was all fake. The Henderson Foundation has copies of everything. The fake receipts, the staged photos, the made-up testimonials. Mr. Franklin looked like he might cry or shout or both. We gave her $200,000. Money that could have gone to real charities, money that could have actually helped children. Other people in the crowd were realizing the same thing. They had all been fooled. They had all given money thinking they were doing good, but instead they had funded Vivian's luxurious lifestyle. A younger man in a business suit stepped forward. "I'm an attorney," he said. "This isn't just wrong. This is illegal. This is fraud, wire fraud, tax fraud, charity fraud. She could go to prison for this." Vivian was crying so hard now that she could barely stand. Her perfect makeup was running down her face in black streaks. Her golden dress seemed too bright, too fancy, like a costume that no longer fit. "I didn't mean for it to get like this," she sobbed. "It started small. Just a little money here and there for expenses. But then the charity grew and there was so much money coming in. I thought I deserved some of it. I was working hard. I was hosting events. I was talking to donors. I thought I earned it." "You didn't earn it," Mr. Franklin said coldly. "You stole it." Margaret felt no joy in this moment. She had done her job, but there was no satisfaction in watching someone fall apart. Even someone who had done terrible things. She remembered Vivian from college before all of this, before the greed and the lies. Vivian had been different then. "Not perfect, but not like this. What about the money?" a woman asked. "The money that was donated. Can we get it back?" Margaret shook her head. "Most of it is gone. Spent on trips and clothes and jewelry and cars. The Henderson Foundation will work with authorities to recover what they can, but realistically most of the money is lost." The crowd erupted in angry voices. People were shouting questions and accusations. Some were calling for police. Others were calling their lawyers. The beautiful party had turned into chaos. Robert Ashford stood apart from everyone, staring at his wife. "How could you do this?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper, but in a moment of quiet, everyone heard it. "How could you lie to all these people? How could you lie to me?" Vivian reached out to him. "Robert, please. We can fix this. We can pay the money back. We can—" "With what?" Robert asked. "You spent it all. On yourself. While I thought you were helping people, you were just helping yourself." He turned to Margaret. "Our house. The renovations we did last year. The new furniture. The art we bought. Did that come from the charity too?" Margaret looked down at her papers. She did not want to answer, but she had to. "Yes. Over $300,000 from the charity was used for home improvements and purchases. The invoices show that work was done at your address." Robert closed his eyes. "I'll lose my business, my reputation, everything." He opened his eyes and looked at Vivian. "Because of you." Margaret pulled out one final document. It was an official letter on Henderson Foundation letterhead. "This letter will be delivered to every donor tomorrow. It explains what happened and provides a list of legitimate charities where they can direct future donations. The foundation is also offering free workshops on how to research charities before donating." She looked around at all the angry, hurt faces. "I know this is painful. I know many of you feel betrayed. But I want you to know that most charities are good. Most people who work in charity do it because they truly want to help others. Don't let this experience stop you from being generous. Just be more careful about where you give your money." The older man, Mr. Franklin, nodded slowly. "Thank you for exposing this, Ms. Evans. It took courage to come here tonight." Margaret felt tired suddenly. She had been preparing for this moment for months. Now it was done. "I was just doing my job," she said quietly. The marble entrance hall of the Grandview Country Club had changed completely in the last half hour. The music from the ballroom had stopped. The waiters stood against the walls, unsure what to do. The guests who had been laughing and drinking champagne were now standing in tight groups, talking in angry, urgent voices. Margaret watched as the power in the room shifted completely. 30 minutes ago, Vivian had been the center of attention. Everyone had wanted to talk to her, to be seen with her, to be her friend. Now people were moving away from her like she carried a disease. The woman in the red dress who had laughed when Vivian insulted Margaret's clothes walked up to Vivian. Her face was hard and cold. "I donated $15,000 to your charity last year. My husband and I gave that money because we believed we were helping children go to college. We have the tax receipt from Children's Hope Alliance." "What did you do with our money, Vivian?" Vivian could not meet her eyes. I don't remember every donation. $15,000, the woman repeated. Her voice was getting louder. That's not something you forget. I want to know what happened to it. Margaret stepped forward and gently touched the woman's arm. Ma'am, the Henderson Foundation has records of all donations. If you contact our office, we can tell you exactly when your donation was received and how it was spent. The woman turned to Margaret. Will you really do that? Yes, Margaret said. We have everything documented. Every donation, every expense. It's all there. The woman nodded, then looked back at Vivian with disgust. I thought you were my friend. We had lunch together every month. You came to my daughter's wedding. And all that time you were stealing from people. She walked away and another person took her place. Then another. One by one, people who had donated money came forward to confront Vivian. They were angry. They were hurt. They felt betrayed by someone they had trusted. Patricia, the woman who had insulted Margaret's bag, stood nearby watching everything. She caught Margaret's eye and walked over slowly. She looked embarrassed. I owe you an apology, Patricia said quietly.
What I said earlier about your bag.
That was unkind. Margaret looked at her for a moment. Patricia's white hair was still perfect. Her dress probably cost thousands of dollars, but her face showed genuine shame. Thank you, Margaret said simply. I gave $20,000 to Vivian's charity, Patricia continued. I thought I was doing something good. I thought I was helping children. She shook her head. I'm a fool. You're not a fool, Margaret said. You have a good heart. Vivian took advantage of that, but that doesn't make you foolish. It makes her wrong. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Will those children ever get help? The real ones who need it? Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. The Henderson Foundation is setting up a special fund. We're going to raise money specifically for the projects that Vivian promised, but never delivered. Jefferson Elementary will get its renovation. The food banks will get their supplies. The families will get the help they were promised. Patricia took the card. I want to donate again. The same amount. But this time to a real charity. Thank you, Margaret said. That's very generous. More people were approaching Margaret now. They wanted business cards. They wanted to know about the legitimate charities. They wanted to understand how this could have happened and how to prevent it in the future. Margaret found herself surrounded by the same people who had stared at her dress and laughed at her bag. But now they were treating her with respect. Now they were listening to every word she said. Mr. Franklin, the older man with silver hair, raised his voice. Everyone, please. May I have your attention? The crowd quieted down and turned to him. He was clearly someone important, someone people listened to. I think we all owe Ms. Evans our thanks, he said. She had the courage to come here tonight and tell us the truth. A truth that many of us didn't want to hear. A truth that is painful and embarrassing. He paused and looked around at everyone. But it's a truth we needed to know. If Ms. Evans hadn't investigated this charity, if she hadn't stood up here tonight and shown us the evidence, Vivian would have continued to steal from good people who wanted to help others. People nodded and murmured in agreement. Ms. Evans, Mr. Franklin continued, on behalf of everyone here, thank you. You did the right thing, even though it must have been difficult. The crowd began to clap, slowly at first, then louder. Margaret felt her face get warm. She was not used to this kind of attention. She had just been doing her job, following the evidence, telling the truth. But looking at these people's faces, she understood that it meant something to them. They had been fooled and used, and she had helped them see it. That mattered to them. Vivian was standing alone now. Even her husband had moved away from her. She looked small and lost in her golden dress. All her confidence, all her cruelty from earlier was gone. She was just a woman who had made terrible choices and was now facing the consequences. Robert Ashford was talking quietly with a man who looked like a lawyer. Margaret could hear parts of their conversation. Robert was asking about divorce, about separating his finances from Vivian's, about protecting himself from her crimes. A police officer entered the hall. He must have been providing security for the event. He walked over to Margaret. Ma'am, he said, I overheard some of what you said. Are you saying there's evidence of fraud? Margaret nodded. Yes, officer. The Henderson Foundation has been working with the district attorney's office. They're aware of the situation. I believe they'll be taking action soon. The officer looked at Vivian. Is she going to try to leave? I don't think so, Margaret said. But perhaps you should stay nearby just in case. The officer nodded and moved to a position where he could watch Vivian. More people were leaving now. They had heard enough. They had seen enough. What was supposed to be an elegant charity gala had turned into something else entirely. Some people looked angry as they left. Others looked sad. A few looked thoughtful, like they were rethinking many things about their lives. A young journalist appeared, camera in hand. She must have been covering the event for the society pages. "Excuse me, are you Margaret Evans from the Henderson Foundation?" Margaret sighed. She had hoped to avoid the media tonight. "Yes, I am. Can I ask you some questions?" This is a major story. A prominent socialite accused of charity fraud. The public has a right to know. Margaret thought about it. Part of her wanted to just leave. To go home to her small apartment and her comfortable chair and her cup of tea. But another part of her knew that the journalist was right. This story needed to be told. Other people in other cities might be running similar fake charities. If this story was reported widely, it might help stop them. "I can give you a brief statement," Margaret said, "but I can't discuss all the details." "The investigation is still ongoing." The journalist pulled out a notepad. "Can you tell me what the Henderson Foundation found?" Margaret chose her words carefully. "The Henderson Foundation investigates charitable organizations to ensure they're using donations properly. Our investigation into Children's Hope Alliance revealed that the majority of donated funds were not being used for charitable purposes. Instead, they were spent on personal expenses and luxury items. We've provided all our evidence to the proper authorities." "How much money are we talking about?" the journalist asked. "Over the past 3 years, approximately $5 million was donated to Children's Hope Alliance. Less than 20% of that money went to actual charity work." The journalist's eyes widened. She scribbled quickly in her notepad. "That's $4 million that was stolen?" "I can't use the word stolen," Margaret said. "That's for the courts to decide. But yes, approximately $4 million was not used for its intended purpose. Will there be criminal charges?" "That's up to the district attorney," Margaret said. "But given the amount of money involved and the evidence we've gathered, I would expect serious legal consequences." The journalist looked over at Vivian, who was sitting on the stairs now, her head in her hands. "Do you have any comment about Mrs. Ashford personally?" Margaret shook her head. "I'm here to report facts, not to make personal judgments. The facts speak for themselves." The journalist thanked her and moved toward Vivian, but the police officer stopped her. "No questions right now," he said firmly. Margaret picked up her old leather bag. It felt lighter now, even though all the papers were still inside. She had carried this evidence for so long, preparing for this moment. Now the evidence was out in the open. Her job was done. Mr. Franklin approached her again. "Ms. Evans, I'd like to invite you to speak at the Franklin Foundation's annual meeting next month. I think our board members and donors would benefit from hearing about your work. We need to learn how to spot fraudulent charities." "I'd be happy to," Margaret said. Other people were coming forward with similar requests. Could she speak at their organization? Could she help them review their donation procedures? Could she recommend trustworthy charities? Margaret answered each person patiently, handing out business cards, making notes about follow-up meetings. This was the part of her job she loved. Not exposing fraud, though that was necessary, but helping people understand how to give wisely, how to make sure their generosity actually helped others. 3 weeks had passed since the night at the Grandview Country Club. Margaret sat in her small office at the Henderson Foundation, looking through the morning newspaper. The headline read, "Society Charity Queen Arrested on Fraud Charges." The article included a photo of Vivian being led away by police. She was not wearing a gold dress anymore. She wore simple clothes and no jewelry. Her face looked tired and older somehow. The article explained that she had been charged with multiple counts of fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion. If convicted, she could face 10 to 15 years in prison. Margaret put the newspaper down. She felt no satisfaction in seeing Vivian's downfall. There was only sadness. Sadness for the donors who had been betrayed, sadness for the children who never got the help they were promised, and even sadness for Vivian, who had thrown away everything for money and status. Her phone rang. It was her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, the director of the Henderson Foundation. "Margaret, can you come to my office?" Mrs. Chen asked. "There's something I want to discuss with you." Margaret walked down the hall to Mrs. Chen's office. It was a modest room with a simple desk and chairs. Unlike Vivian's fancy country club, the Henderson Foundation spent its money on helping people, not on expensive decorations. Mrs. Chen smiled when Margaret entered. She was a small woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gray hair. She had been running the Henderson Foundation for 20 years. "Sit down, Margaret," she said. "I want to talk to you about your work on the Children's Hope Alliance investigation." Margaret sat down, wondering if something was wrong. Had she made a mistake in her report? Had she said something she shouldn't have to the journalist? But Mrs. Chen was still smiling. "You did excellent work," she said. "Not just in gathering evidence, but in how you handled the situation. Standing up in front of all those people and presenting the facts calmly and clearly. That took real courage." "I was just doing my job," Margaret said. "You were doing much more than that," Mrs. Chen replied. "Since that night, we've received over 300 calls from people who want to donate to legitimate charities. We've had 50 organizations ask us to review their procedures, and we've had reports of 12 other suspicious charities that people want us to investigate." Margaret's eyes widened. 12 more? Mrs. Chen nodded. "Your work has started something important. People are paying attention now. They're asking questions. They're not just giving money blindly anymore. They're doing research. They're demanding accountability." She pulled out a folder from her desk. "The board of directors met yesterday. They voted unanimously to create a new position, Director of Charitable Integrity. The person in this position would lead investigations into suspicious charities, create educational programs for donors, and work with other foundations to establish better standards." Mrs. Chen slid the folder across the desk to Margaret. "They want you to take the position." Margaret stared at the folder. She opened it slowly and saw the job description. The salary was much higher than what she made now. There would be a team of investigators working under her. She would have resources to do much bigger investigations. "I don't know what to say," Margaret said. "Say yes," Mrs. Chen replied with a smile. "You're the right person for this job. You've proven that." Margaret thought about her small apartment and her old car and her worn-out clothes. With this salary, she could afford better things. But that's not what made her want to say yes. What made her want to say yes was the chance to help more people. The chance to stop more frauds like Vivian. The chance to protect donors and make sure their money reached people who truly needed it. "Yes," Margaret said. "I'll take it." Mrs. Chen stood up and shook her hand. "Congratulations. You start next month. That will give you time to finish your current cases and hire your team." Margaret left Mrs. Chen's office feeling like she was floating. She had never imagined her career would take this direction. She had always been happy doing quiet research, working behind the scenes. But now she had a chance to make a real difference on a larger scale. When she got back to her office, there was a message on her desk. Patricia, the woman who had insulted her bag at the country club, had called. Margaret dialed her number. "Ms. Evans," Patricia said when she answered.
Thank you for calling back.
"I wanted you to know that I've donated $50,000 to the special fund for Jefferson Elementary School. I also convinced 3 of my friends to donate. Together we've raised $200,000. "That's wonderful," Margaret said. "The children at that school will finally get the help they need." "There's something else," Patricia said. "I'm organizing a group of donors. We want to learn how to research charities properly before we give money. Would you be willing to teach us?" "We could meet once a month," Margaret smiled. "I'd be happy to. In fact, the Henderson Foundation is creating educational programs for exactly that purpose. You and your group would be perfect for our pilot program." They talked for a few more minutes, making plans. When Margaret hung up, she felt hopeful. Good things were coming from bad situations. People were learning. People were changing. Her phone rang again. This time it was Mr. Franklin, the older man with silver hair. "Ms. Evans, I have news," he said. "The Franklin Foundation has established a new grant. We're calling it the Thomas Henderson Memorial Grant for Charitable Excellence. Every year, we'll give $200,000 to organizations that demonstrate the highest standards of integrity and effectiveness." "That's a wonderful tribute to Mr. Henderson," Margaret said. "We'd like you to be on the selection committee," Mr. Franklin said. "We need people who understand what real charity looks like. People who can spot the difference between genuine help and selfish exploitation." Margaret agreed, adding this to her growing list of new responsibilities. Over the next few weeks, more good news came. The district attorney's office announced that they had recovered almost $1 million from Vivian's assets. The money would be distributed to the legitimate charities that should have received it in the first place. Jefferson Elementary School was first on the list. Margaret visited the school one afternoon. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, showed her around. They walked through classrooms with broken desks and old books. They saw a bathroom where the sinks didn't work properly. They looked at a library that had almost no books. "This is what we've been living with," Mrs. Rodriguez said sadly. "Every year we hope for help. Sometimes people promise things, but nothing happens. When Vivian Ashford promised to renovate our school, we were so excited. We told the children that things would get better. Then nothing happened. The children lost hope. Things are going to change now," Margaret promised. "The Henderson Foundation has made sure of it. Within 3 months, your school will have new desks, new books, working bathrooms, and a fully stocked library." Mrs. Rodriguez started crying. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it," Margaret said. "And there's more. 3 local businesses have agreed to sponsor after-school programs. You'll have tutoring, sports, and arts classes for the children." Mrs. Rodriguez hugged Margaret tightly. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means to us, but Margaret did know. That's why she did this work. For moments like this. For children who would finally get the help they deserved. For teachers who could finally teach in proper classrooms. For communities that would see that some people did keep their promises. The trial date for Vivian was set for 6 months later. Margaret would have to testify. She was not looking forward to it, but she would do it. She would tell the truth, just like she had at the country club. She heard through the news that Robert Ashford had divorced Vivian. He had cooperated with investigators and was not charged with any crimes. The evidence showed he truly didn't know what his wife was doing. He had lost his reputation and many friends, but he was trying to rebuild his life. Margaret also heard that Vivian's sister and friends, the ones who had been paid as fake consultants, were being investigated too. They had known the money was coming from a charity. They had known they weren't doing real work. They would likely face charges as well. One evening, Margaret was working late at her office when she received an unexpected visitor. It was a young woman, maybe 25 years old, wearing jeans and a simple shirt. "Ms. Evans?" the woman said nervously. "I'm sorry to bother you so late. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm Mrs. Chen's daughter." Margaret invited her in. "Is everything okay? Is your mother all right?" "Oh yeah, she's fine," Sarah said quickly. "I came to talk to you about something else. I just graduated with a degree in accounting. I've been looking for jobs, but nothing feels right. Then my mother told me about the work you do, about exposing fraud and helping people. I want to do that too." Margaret smiled. "Are you asking for a job?" Sarah nodded eagerly. "I know I don't have experience, but I'm good with numbers. I'm good at finding patterns, and I want to use my skills to help people, not just to make rich companies richer." Margaret thought about the new position she was taking. She would need to build a team. She would need people who were smart and dedicated and cared about doing the right thing. "Can you start next month?" Margaret asked. Sarah's face lit up. "Really? You're hiring me?" "I'm building a team of investigators," Margaret explained. "We're going to review charities across the entire state. We need people who are good with numbers and who care about making a difference. I think you'd be perfect." Sarah looked like she might cry from happiness. "Thank you. You won't regret this. I promise I'll work hard." After Sarah left, Margaret sat alone in her office. She looked at her old leather bag sitting on the chair. The same bag that Vivian and her friends had mocked. The bag that held the evidence that changed everything. She picked it up and ran her fingers over the cracked leather. This bag had been with her through so much. It had carried her through hard times. It had held her hopes in her work and her determination to do good in the world. Maybe she could afford a new bag now. A nice one that didn't have cracks or a sticky zipper. But she thought she would keep this one a while longer. It reminded her of something important. It reminded her that value isn't about appearance. It's about what's inside. It's about character and truth and courage. The same was true for people. Vivian had looked perfect on the outside with her gold dress and diamonds. But inside she was empty. She had traded her integrity for luxury and her compassion for greed. Margaret, in her simple dress and old bag, had been the one with real value. She had truth on her side. She had courage. She had compassion for those who needed help. Those things were worth more than all the gold dresses and diamond necklaces in the world. She turned off the lights in her office and walked out into the cool evening air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. There would be more fraudulent charities to investigate. more donors to educate, more children and families who needed protection from people who would exploit their needs. But tonight, Margaret felt at peace. She had done the right thing. She had stood up for what was true and good. And she had shown that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply open your bag and tell the truth.